Welcome back to another exciting episode of Southern Sorcery. Today, I am thrilled to take you on a journey through one of my all-time favorite commander decks, providing you with an in-depth breakdown of all the cards and the strategy. Let's get to it. Woo! Alright, on today's Deck Tech, the breakdown, we have Urza, Chief Artificer. He is 3 generic mana, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 black. He is a 4/5, and he says affinity for artifact creatures, which just means he is 1 generic less for each artifact creature that you have out on the board. So commander tax, if you can get some artifact creatures out, commander tax isn't so bad. You can just keep recasting him for 1 blue, 1 white, 1 black. He grants artifact creatures that you control have menace, so he gives other artifact creatures that you control menace. And at the beginning of your end step, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So he makes artifact creatures in the form of constructs, and they get freaking huge because they get +1/+1 for every artifact that you control. And buddy, is this deck full of artifacts. We'll go ahead and get started with the rundown of this deck. Yeah, we'll just walk through it together. This is my personal deck that I run, and it's a blast. I love playing this deck. So we'll start out first. There's one and only one planeswalker in the deck, and that is Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. He has a static ability, which is the best thing about him. Creatures and planeswalkers that you cast have an affinity for artifacts. So with him out, he makes every artifact or other planeswalkers, which I don't run any other planeswalkers, but every artifact that you cast 1 generic less for however many artifacts you have out. So things get really cheap really fast. Soul Ring is free, Arcane Signet is free. Like, it just happens so fast. So huge cost reduction there. And that's just his cost reduction. Now let's take a look at his actual loyalty abilities here. +2, Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control. You gain X life. So I got 5 artifacts out. Oh, okay. Just ping everyone for 5, and then I gain 5 life. That's pretty nasty. His -3 is to return a artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. And then his ultimate -8, exile the top 10 cards of your library. Put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield, which is pretty good. It's hard to ultimate a planeswalker, and really that's not what you want to do with him anyway. You just want to keep him out on the battlefield and try to protect him as much as you can for that huge reduction count. Like I was saying, his ult exiles the top 10 cards of your library and put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield. That's really good, but also with just a handful of artifacts out, all of your artifacts are free to play anyway. So you just need a card draw engine. Like I said, ulting him is great. I'm not saying don't do it by any stretch. I'm just saying you want him out on the battlefield, and you want to try to keep him around as long as you can. We can go ahead and move into instants. And with this being an artifact heavy deck, most of the instants here are some sort of removal or protection. So we've got Rapid Hybridization, destroy a target creature for one blue. It can't be regenerated. That creature's controller puts a 3/3 frog lizard creature token onto the battlefield. So you kill whatever creature of theirs that you don't like, and they make a 3/3 frog lizard instead. Flawless Maneuver. If you control a commander, you can cast this spell without paying its mana cost. This has saved me a ton of times. Creatures you control gain indestructible until the end of turn. So it's really nice if you want to go to combat and swing out wide at somebody, and you just kind of want to bait them into blocking, and then all your stuff gets indestructible, so then none of it dies. Or just when someone swings at you, or a board wipe, this really protects you from that kind of thing. Fierce Guardianship. If you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its cost. Counter target non-creature spell. The only it's free. Free is great. It's just it has to be a non-creature spell for Fierce Guardianship. Swords to Plowshares. Exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. So one of the white exile spells, so it gets around indestructible, which is nice. Vampiric Tutor. Just let you go get your best thing. Put it on top of your library and pay 2 life. Angel's Grace is another protection spell. Split second. As long as this spell is on the stack, players can't play spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. You can't lose the game this turn, and your opponents can't win the game this turn. Until the end of turn, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. So it's literally just like a Hail Mary, and then hope that you can get back to your turn. Path to Exile, it's basically the same thing as Swords to Plowshares, except for instead of your opponent gaining life, they go and get a basic land. Enlightened Tutor, search your library for an artifact or an enchantment card and reveal that card to all players. Shuffle your library and put that back on top of it. So this lets you go get your Smothering Tithe or an Anointed Procession or whatever else that you have in here that's situational. I mean, if you need mana, you can go get Soul Ring, you can go get Arcane Signet, just whatever you need in that situation. It just kind of bails you out a little bit. Unbreakable Formation, another protection spell. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Kind of the same thing. And then if you cast it during your main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain vigilance till end of turn. Like I was saying about Flawless Maneuver, this one is a little more incentivized to actually play it on your turn so that you can go to combat, and then you're getting ready to swing out, and then at the last minute you can give everything +1/+1 and vigilance. Mystic Forge, you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact card or a colorless non-land card. So that's pretty good. And then you can tap it and pay 1 life to exile the top card of your library. The whole point of this is to be able to look at the top card of your library anytime. And then if you have it out with something like Tezzeret, you can literally play it for free. Sword of the Meek, this is an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+2 with a equip cost of 2. But whenever a 1/1 creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Sword of the Meek from your graveyard to the battlefield, then attach it to that creature. So Sword of the Meek is a really cool artifact that will go infinite with other things, because we have a lot of ways to make 1/1 creatures, artifact creatures especially, and so you can just keep returning Sword of the Meek from the graveyard. I will talk about that a little more whenever we get to it. Arcane Signet, taps for any color your commander, staple in every deck. Thopter Foundry, here's the other one. However much mana you have, you can do this an infinite amount of times if you have an infinite mana. So you can pay 1 and sacrifice a non-token artifact. Put a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying into play, and then you gain 1 life. So what you do is, if you have both of these out, Thopter Foundry and Sword of the Meek, you can pay 1, sacrifice Sword of the Meek. Sword of the Meek will go to your graveyard. Then you will create a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So then you put the Thopter token into play. And then Sword of the Meek says, when a 1/1 creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Sword of the Meek from the graveyard to the battlefield, then attach it to that creature for free. Then you attach Sword of the Meek to this Thopter. Then you pay another 1 and you sacrifice Sword of the Meek. And then you make another Thopter. Okay, so now you've got another Thopter. Then Sword of the Meek sees that 1/1 creature enter, and you equip it to that. Then you keep doing it over and over and over. So as long as you have mana, you can do it that many times. Very cool little combo. It really helps, especially like if you need flying blockers. It's like, say you're playing a Dragons deck and you don't really have any flyers. This really helps out, having the ability to just kind of create an infinite amount of those guys. Plus, then you gain life for each time that it happens as well. The Immortal Sun, the legendary artifact. Players can't activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. So that just kind of stacks other people's Planeswalkers. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. Spells you cast cost 1 less to cast generic. So a cost reduction, you get to draw 2 cards on your upkeep, and then creatures you control get +1/+1. And we're not a Planeswalker heavy deck, so it really doesn't matter to us. Tezzeret's probably not going to be out at the same time. Thought Vessel, just another mana rock, gives you no maximum hand size. Chromatic Lantern, lands you control have add 1 mana of any color. So it gives your lands the ability to produce any color, and then it taps itself for 1 mana of any color. Mox Opal, this is a really good artifact. It costs nothing, so in the early game, even if you don't have 3 artifacts out, it still counts towards your artifact count, which pumps up your construct creatures. Metalcraft, tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Activate this only if you have 3 or more artifacts. You should have 3 artifacts out on turn 2. Like, there's so many artifacts in this deck. The Might Stone and the Weak Stone, when it enters a battlefield, choose 1. You can draw 2 cards, or a target creature gets -5/-5 until the end of turn. It taps for 2 colorless. This mana can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells. Good thing we have tons of artifacts in this deck, so yeah, that should never be a problem. Cranial Plating, another really good equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. And then instead of casting it for 2 and paying on 1, you could just pay 2 black to attach cranial plating to a target creature you control. It makes other things huge because you're already going to have a ton of artifacts out, so it gives you can equip it to Urza, and you got 8 artifacts out. Well, now he's a 12/5 instead of a 4/5, so it gets really powerful really fast. It's just very on theme for this deck. Encroaching Mycosynth. Non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So it turns your entire deck and everything you have into an artifact, which just plays into something like cranial plating. So now if you've got 10 permanents out and only 8 of them are artifacts, well, now those are just artifacts too. Another version of this card is Mycosynth Lattice, and that turns everything on the entire table into artifacts. So that's another option if you didn't want to do Encroaching Mycosynth. Soul Ring, a 1-drop that taps for 2. Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp's a great artifact. It's a great card draw engine, so you can equip it for 1. If you want to use it for the card draw, you equip it to something like a Thopter. That's a 1/1. And so it gives this creature +1/-1. So essentially what happens is you pay 1 to equip it, this dies, and then whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. So then you would draw 2 cards. And so you can just, if you've got a deck that makes lots of 1/1s, Skull Clamp is really, really busted because you can just keep drawing cards for 1 mana generic. We're moving into creatures now and out of artifacts. All right, let's check out the creatures in this deck. We run a ton of creatures in this deck and a lot of artifact creatures. Again, our commander has the affinity for artifact creatures and he gives them all menace, so we really play into that. First up is Baleful Strix. He has flying and death touch. Whenever Baleful Strix enters the battlefield, draw a card. So he's a cantrip on top of already being a 2-drop and a pretty good flying with death touch, and he'll have menace if your commander is out. Plus you get to draw a card, so that's a really good part in this. Aethersworn Sphinx is a very expensive 7 generic, 1 white, 1 blue, but you're never going to pay that for him because he has affinity for artifacts. So most of the time you're going to be playing him for 1 white, 1 blue. Because we're just going to have so many artifacts out on the board. We've got artifact lands, we've got artifacts, we've got artifact creatures, we've got artifact creature tokens, we've got artifacts everywhere. So you're almost never going to pay 9 for him. He has flying, he's a 4/4, and he also has Cascade. And with him being 9, that's really good because even if you only pay the 1 white, 1 blue, when you go to Cascade, you'll Cascade for the next spell that costs less than 9. So pretty much everything in the deck, your next spell is just going to be free healed. This is not a artifact creature, it is a Dwarf Artificer. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 2 generic. Whenever you do, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So the exact same tokens as what Urza makes, Digside Engineer makes if you pay 2, and you definitely should be. Like, these get huge. They see themselves, they see every other artifact, they get huge, and then you can just break face with them. And they'll all have menace. They're very powerful. Lion Sash, an artifact creature, you can pay a white and exile a target card from a graveyard. So it gives you the ability to shut down recursion on somebody's graveyard. And if it was a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. You can also use Lion Sash as an equipment. So it by itself is an artifact creature, but it's also an equipment. It's an equipment cat. You can reconfigure it for 2, so like you can equip it, and then the equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. And then you can still pay the 1 white to exile stuff from people's graveyards and make it bigger. So then you would be making the equipped creature even bigger. So it just gives you a little bit of flexibility. If you want to have another blocker, another body out on the board, you can just leave it as itself as Lion Sash as the artifact creature. But if you want to attach it to something and swing in big on somebody, you can do that too. So you can kind of go big or go wide. Gold Mirror is an artifact creature, and it taps for 1 white, so like a little mana dork, but it's an artifact creature. Sai Master Thopterist. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So this is just another way to get more of those artifact creatures out onto the board. And then if you want, you can pay 1 generic, 1 blue, sacrifice 2 artifacts, and then draw a card. So it just gives you a little bit of a way to draw a card if you're in the need and you've got a bunch of tokens already out and you don't need them. You can just sack them and draw a card. Phyrexian Metamorph. It's an artifact creature and it's a shapeshifter. It also has Phyrexian Blue in its cost, and Phyrexian Blue just means you can pay either 1 regular blue or you can pay 2 life instead of paying the blue. So you could pay 3 generic and 2 life instead of paying the blue pip in its cost. It's a 0/0, but you can have Phyrexian Metamorph enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield. So you can copy one of your own artifacts or one of your own creatures or something somebody else controls. You want a copy of their commander or whatever the case might be, something really strong on the table. You can make it come in as a copy of that. For 3 generic and 2 life, I could have something crazy like an Eldrazi or just whatever else is out there on the board that you want. And worst case scenario, you could make it be a copy of Sol Ring or something else, that whatever you need in a pinch. It's a shapeshifter. It's pretty cool. Ethereum Sculptor. It is a 1 generic, 1 blue, and says artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So just some more reduction. Urza, Prince of Krug. He is a legendary creature, human artificer. Gives artifact creatures you control +2/+2. So he just buffs all of your other stuff. And then you can pay 6 to create a token that's a copy of a target artifact you control, except for it's also a 1/1 soldier in addition to its other types. So you can just make copies of other artifacts or artifact creatures that you control with him. Sharding Sphinx. It is 4 and 2 blue for a flying Sphinx. Whenever an artifact creature you control deals damage to a player, you may create a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So anytime a artifact creature you control deals damage, you get to make a 1/1 Thopter. So just making tokens all over the place. For 4 generic and 1 blue, we have Aethersworn Adjunctor. It is an artifact creature with flying. It's 4/4, and it has 2 different abilities. You can pay 1 generic, 1 white, 1 black. Tap it and destroy a target creature or an enchantment, so a little bit of removal there for you. And then once you've done that, you can pay 2 generic and a blue to untap Aethersworn Adjunctor. So you could do it a couple of times if you have the mana to do it. Thought Monitor. It's another kind of hefty, expensive artifact creature, but it also has affinity for artifacts. So it's 6 generic, 1 blue. Again, if you have 6 artifacts out, you can just cast it for a single blue. It has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. So pretty cool. Spell's Kite is an artifact creature that costs 2, and then you can pay into it 1 Phyrexian blue. So that, again, is either 1 island, 1 blue, or 2 life. So you can pay that and then change the target of a target spell or ability to Spell's Kite. So you redirect something that's happening at the table. If someone wants to exile something that you don't want to get exiled, you can pay 2 life or 1 blue and direct that to Spell's Kite instead. So then Spell's Kite would bear the brunt of whatever that is. Or something good if someone's trying to do something where they buff something. Hey, I'm going to use this target spell or ability to target my thing and pump it up and make it bigger or make a copy of it. You just say, that's okay, I'll take that instead. So I'll pay 2 life and I'll gain that. Spell's Kite will gain whatever that thing is. So it's a pretty cool little sort of a counter spell, sort of a deflecting swat. It's an artifact creature instead of an instant or a sorcery, and you can kind of do it anytime, and it's got some pretty cool mechanics that you can kind of mess around with this and get into some shenanigans with. And again, it counts toward our artifact creature count, so it keeps our commander nice and cheap. Next we have Urza, Lord Protector. 1 generic, 1 white, 1 blue for a legendary creature, human artificer, that says artifacts, instant, and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So a little bit of mana reduction there with him. And then you can pay 7. And if you have him and you have the Might Stone and the Weak Stone, you can pay 7. Exile them, and then meld them into Urza Planeswalker. So this is actually really cool. You pay that 7, and you flip them over to the backside to make a huge Planeswalker. So you turn it into Urza Planeswalker. I've never done this in a game, but it just seems so cool. It's just so expensive. It's literally 7. You may activate the loyalty abilities of Urza Planeswalker twice each turn rather than only once. What? And then he has 5 abilities. This is literally crazy, but very cool. Like, what? Artifact, instant, sorcery spells you cast this turn cost 2 less to cast. You gain 2 life. That's his +2 ability. For a +1 ability, you can draw 2 cards, then discard a card. For nothing, 0, you can create 2 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens. So again, just more artifact creature tokens. For -3, you can exile target non-land permanent. So that's pretty good. You literally can exile anything on the board as long as it's not a land. And then for his ult, -10, artifacts and planeswalkers you control gain indestructible until the end of the turn. Destroy all non-land permanents. So that's a huge one-sided board wipe, as most of our stuff and potentially all of our stuff are artifacts. So you would just blow up everyone else's stuff and then you could just swing in for the win. So kind of crazy, very unique, very expensive, because you got to get both of these cards out at the same time together and then pay the 7 to meld him, and then hope that no one blows it up immediately. Vidalcan Humiliator, he is 3 generic and a blue and says Metalcraft. Whenever he attacks, if you control 3 or more artifacts, creatures your opponents control lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 1/1 until the end of turn. So very good, really, really good. Turns everybody else's stuff into 1/1, so that, I mean, there's no way they're gonna be able to stop you with that. Shimmermere, that one, Shimmermere. He has flash and then allows you to cast artifact spells as though they had flash, so at instant speed. Very cool. Platoon Dispenser, a colorless 5. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more other creatures, draw a card. We shouldn't have any issues having more than 2 creatures out, so you should be drawing lots of cards. And then you can pay 3 generic and a white to make a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So another way just to make more tokens. Esper Sentinel, 1 white artifact creature human soldier. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, draw a card unless that player pays X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power. Some people call this card Rhystic Buddy, play on Rhystic Study, but he's just a 1-drop artifact creature, which is perfect in this deck. And also, he's a card draw engine, so potentially you could draw, up to 3 cards per turn cycle. Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter, a 3-drop, has flash and flying. You may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. So again, at instant speed. Whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator, Urza Battlethopter's power, put a 1/1 counter on Liberator. So that just is a way to pump this up after you cast it. It's a 1/2, and if you cast more expensive spells than 1, you put 1 on. Then that puts its power at 2. So then if you cast a spell more expensive than 2, you put another on, and so on and so on. Grand Arbiter, Augustin the Fourth. People hate this card because of this last line of text here. So white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. So that's what people really hate. They call it a stacks piece. I don't really think it's that big of a deal. I've played against decks that make spells more expensive, and it's not that big a deal. Most of the time, people are just going to remove it anyway. Moving on, we have Rebek, Architect of Ascension. She is 3 and 1 white for a 3/4 human artificer. Artifacts you control have protection from each converted mana cost among artifacts you control. However many artifacts you have out, whatever their total mana cost is, like this card is 3 generic and 1 white, so it's 4. It's pretty cool. It's just protection for your board. Research Thief is a 4 generic 1 blue for an artifact creature, Moonfolk Wizard. Moonfolk is not a thing you see very frequently. It has flash and flying. Whenever an artifact creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So just another way to draw some more cards. Card draw is pretty important in this deck. Silvermere is 2 and it taps for blue. So Mana Dork for blue. Padim, Console of Innovation. Artifacts you control have hexproof, so that keeps people from targeting your artifacts and artifact creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost or tied for the highest converted mana cost, draw a card. We do run some expensive artifacts in here, especially with all the reductions, so that should pretty much draw you a card at the beginning of your upkeep every single time. Mirror Battlesphere, so right here, 7-drop for an artifact creature, so that counts. When it enters the battlefield, create 4 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature tokens. Whenever Mirror Battlesphere attacks, you can tap X untap mirror you control. If you do, Mirror Battlesphere gets +X+0 until end of turn and deals X damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. Whirler Rogue is a 2 and 2 blue for a 2/2 human rogue artificer. When it enters the battlefield, make 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creatures with flying. So more 1/1 Thoptops. And then you can tap 2 untapped artifacts, and then a target creature can't be blocked this turn. So you're just giving something unblockable if you tap 2 artifacts. And those can be any artifacts. It doesn't have to be the 2/1/1 colorless Thopters. It could be any 2 artifacts. You could use the artifacts that don't even tap, that don't even matter. Moving on to Lochiel, Clockwork Scholar. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking artifact creatures you control. So they literally get no combat damage. This is awesome. This deck just wants to swing big and break people's faces. It's just make a buttload of tokens and a bunch of huge constructs and just swing for like 15-15. So when this is out, it's pretty good. And then in a second line of text says, whenever one or more artifact creatures enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So when you play an artifact creature or create an artifact creature token, you can draw a card. Just once per turn though, but still more card draw. Indomitable Archangel. This is a 4/4 flyer for 2 generic and 2 white. It has flying and metalcraft. Artifacts you control have Shroud as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. So just some more protection for your artifacts. The only thing with this to be careful of is Shroud. It keeps you from being able to target your own stuff as well. So you can't like equip stuff or target it for, buffs or whatever while it has Shroud. Platinum Angel, a 7 colorless for a 4/4 flying angel that says you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. So that's also a little bit of just protection. If somebody's trying to go all out on a turn or something and you would lose, if you can get this out or find a way to have it out, then no matter what happens until this card is gone, you can't lose and they can't win. Urza, Lord High Artificer, one of the best cards in this deck. If you don't know, I'm gonna tell you, this is a great card. It is a 1/4 human artificer for 2 generic and 2 blue. When he enters the battlefield, make a 0/0 colorless construct creature that says this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So the same artifact constructs the other Urza commander makes. The difference is this one is super busted because it allows you to tap artifacts for blue mana. So that Thopter Foundry thing that I was talking about earlier, you would have infinite life gain, infinite mana, infinite Thopters, because you could just tap them for mana immediately. Palladium Mirror, he taps for 2 colorless mana, so like a Soul Ring on a artifact creature body for 3. Ornithopter of Paradise, it is a Birds of Paradise, essentially just colorless, and is a 2-drop instead of 1. But that's the play on Ornithopter of Paradise instead of Birds of Paradise. Teshar, Ancestor's Apostle, is a 2/2 flying bird cleric for 3 generic and 1 white mana that says whenever you cast a historic spells are artifacts, legendary spells, or sagas. Those are all considered historic. Whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So that's really nice because all we have is artifacts. So we can just get back our Esper Sentinel, tons of artifact creatures in this, all of our mirrors, lots of other good stuff. Lastly, Aethersworn Canonist, 1 generic, 1 white for a 2/2 artifact creature. Each player who has cast a non-artifact spell this turn can't cast additional non-artifact spells. So it just kind of slows our opponents down and gives us a chance to kind of come back if we're playing from behind a little bit, or just to be mean, whatever you see fit. Moving on, got some sorceries. Don't have a lot of sorceries in this deck. I really hate board wipes. I'll just be the first to tell you that I hate them. Hate them. That being said, if they are a win con in your deck, I don't mind them. I just hate them. Otherwise, you just are prolonging the inevitable more often than not, and it makes your games last a long time. So I don't really run board wipes. However, in this deck, I run Organic Extinction. It is 8 generic and 2 white that says destroy all non-artifact creatures. So this is a win con in my deck. So improvise also means that it's cheaper for each artifact you control. So you're never going to pay the generic 8 and 2 white. More often than not, it's going to be 2 and 2 white, or 3 and 2 white, or sometimes free and 2 white. It just depends how big my board state is and when I want to play it. You would typically play this in your main phase right before you go to combat and blow up everybody else's stuff when you've got a big nice board state going and you've got all these construct creatures that are 15/15s and they've got menace, and you just want to say, well, you know what, I'm just going to kill everyone's board and now I have enough power to go ahead and win the game. That is what that card is for. March of Progress. 2 and a blue for choose target artifact creature you control. For each creature chosen this way, create a token that's a copy of it. So if you cast it for the 2 and a blue, you just make a copy of a artifact creature that you control. If you overload it and pay its overload cost, which is 6 and a blue, you can change the text to replace all instances of target with each. So choose each artifact creature you control. For each creature chosen this way, create a token that's a copy of it. So you would make a copy of every artifact creature you control. So yeah, you pair these up. That'd be good. You pay 2 white, destroy all non-artifact creatures, and then you overload this for 6 and a blue, and you just double your board state. No one will be able to mess with you again. Okay. Now we're moving on to, well, enchantments. First one is Bident of Thassa, which is actually an enchantment artifact. So it's another artifact, but it's also an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card. Great card draw engine, especially with our commander and giving our stuff menace. You're gonna find ways to actually get combat through. And then you can pay 1 and a blue to tap it, and creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. So it essentially goads them. I mean, if somebody had a bunch of small stuff and you wanted them to swing it out so they wouldn't have blockers, you could do this and hopefully eliminate some of those blockers so that then you could be able to get through on your next turn. Anointed Procession, which is 3 and a white. This is a token doubler. If an effect would make 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many instead. So any instance that you're making 1, you're making 2. Any instances that you're making 2, you're making 4, and so on. One with the Multiverse, an enchantment for 6 generic 2 blue that says you can look at your top card of your library at any time. You may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, and then once during each of your turns, you may cast a spell from your hand or the top of your library without paying its mana cost. So free stuff. What's not to love? Thopter Spy Network, enchantment for 2 generic and 2 blue that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, which you will, make a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature with flying. Whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So another kind of redundancy on the Bident of Thassa. You need that card draw. Efficient Construction. When you cast an artifact spell, make a 1/1 Thopter creature with flying. So just more tokens being made. Smothering Tithe, great card for white. Great for a ramp. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If that player doesn't, you create a treasure token. And if you have out Anointed Procession, you'll make 2. People hate that Smothering Tithe. And then from there, I think we just have our lands. And I think we have all the artifact lands that we can run in this. So Razortide Bridge, Vault of Whispers, Mistvault Bridge, Power Depot, Goldmire Bridge, Seat of the Synod, Darksteel Citadel, and Ancient Den. And I think that's all the ones that we can run in this. Yeah. Okay, so we have all those because guess what? Those count towards our artifact count. So even in our lands, we will be able to count artifacts, which just makes those constructs massive. Plus, people don't typically blow up your lands. That's kind of a taboo thing to do in Commander, so most of the time no one messes with them. A couple of them do come in tap. 3, 4 of them come in tap, so like that is something to consider. But you know, these also have some of them have indestructible. These 3 have indestructible. So that's, you know, a little bit of a trade-off. Plus, again, it's counting towards your artifact count. Then you have Exotic Orchard, taps for any mana color that an opponent controls could produce. That was Exotic Orchard. Minamo, School at the Water's Edge. You can tap it for a blue, and then you can pay a blue and tap it to untap a legendary permanent. So that just allows you to kind of untap something of your own or of someone else's. Command Tower, Academy Ruins, taps for 1 generic. And you can pay a generic and a blue and tap it to put an artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library. So it just gives you a little access to some recursion in case someone has blown up an artifact that you really want to get back. Sunken Hollow, which taps for black or blue. It comes in tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Urza's Saga, which is a great card, also creates a 0/0 colorless construct and taps for 1, and then you go get a artifact card from your library, so it tutors something that is 1 or 0, which is great. You can go get a Soul Ring, or Arcane Signet, or Skull Clamp, or whatever. Fairy Stream, enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands, taps for a white or a blue. Glimmer Void, taps for 1 mana of any color. At the beginning of your end step, if you control no artifacts, then sacrifice Glimmer Void. But that should never be an issue. We should have plenty of artifacts, even other lands would suffice for that. Inventor's Fair, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. So just a little bit of life gain might help you out in the end. plus life's a resource, so it taps for a colorless, and then you can pay 4 to sack it, and then you can search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Activate this only if you have 3 or more artifacts, so in a pinch you could go get something with this and get it out into play. Arcane Sanctum taps for white, blue, or black, which is all the colors that we're in. It enters tapped. Bojuka Bog, it enters tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, exile a target player's graveyard. So you can just do a little bit of graveyard hating on somebody's stuff if they're playing recursion or zombies or mill or whatever. Just a way to kind of slow that stuff down. It's a staple. Taps for black. Alright, so guys, that is the deck. That is what we want to do. We want to just make a ton of artifact creatures, make them huge, and then swing in and break people's faces. Like I said, this is a super fun deck. It was actually one of the precons from the Brothers War, the other one being his brother Mishra. But anyway, I've updated this a lot. Obviously, it's not a straight precon, of course. I will link the deck list to my Moxfield account so you guys can go in and check this out, see what's in there, adjust it a little bit, and hit it and play it for yourself. Again, it's super fun. It is combat centric, of course, but it really focuses on artifacts, which is a different take on it other than just, you know, like big stompy green stuff. Give it a look, see what you think, and have a great time with it. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye!